Fish and Wildlife Research Institute tests dozens of water samples each week, and then they report those findings to the public.
A former lead researcher for red tide at the Institute worked for FWC for 15 years, putting out those weekly reports showing areas that were affected by red tide. ABC7's Taylor Torregano joins us live now with Karen Atwood to talk about her experiences with red tide. Taylor?
That's right, Jacqueline Scott. Karen Atwood did have that long history with FWC. Now she's a biology instructor here, and this is one of her classes for USF. Can you tell me a little bit, Karen, with your long history with red tide, where exactly does this harmful algal bloom begin?
So the Florida red tide organism, Corynea brevis, actually begins to bloom well offshore of the west coast of Florida in the Gulf of Mexico, anywhere from 10 to 40 or 50 miles offshore. And it's the currents in the Gulf of Mexico that actually concentrate those cells and brings them inshore on the west coast.
So even though it could be miles and miles off the shore, we're feeling the effects because of winds and currents and things like that. So what exactly causes this harmful bloom? There's a lot up for debate. People go back and forth. What is the cause?
So we have a lot of different physical factors along the West Florida shelf of Florida that can actually cause those bloom concentrations to come into shore and cause them to concentrate in the numbers that we see when we have these very large numbers like we're seeing right now along the West Florida shelf. So mostly it's going to be the currents and those winds that bring them inshore and concentrate them. And normally we see those blooms like we do now anywhere from Pinellas County down into the Keys or down into Monroe County. So normally we see them pop up like around Siesta Key, Sanibel Island, and then we see them further south, and then sometimes we'll see them come up into Pinellas County. So that's not completely unusual. And we can see these blooms occur anywhere from 3 to 4 months at a time, and even up to 18 months or longer at one time. And oftentimes they start in late maybe September, October, and proceed into February or March of the next year, but it's not unusual for it to occur even longer than that.
And is that why it appears, at least for us or for the beachgoers, that it comes in waves, even though it may be present offshore?
That's correct. Corynea brevis is in the water up to about 1,000 cells per liter all the time. That's considered background levels. But when it concentrates like this, sometimes it can appear that it waxes and wanes in that way, but a lot of that has to do with the reporting. So when red tide first pops up, say in September or October, as it did this past year, so in 2017, it will be reported by the news, and people will see it, and they'll see it on the FWC website or on the FWC Facebook page. And that will happen for a few weeks. It'll be very popular, and then it may not be reported for a little while. Winds may be offshore, so people will not experience respiratory irritation or dead fish being washed on shore of the beach, and it will still continue, but it may not be reported. And then we'll have winds, and we'll have waves bringing those dead fish and respiratory irritation in again. It'll be reported again, and then tourists or natives will say, oh, red tide is here again, but in actuality, it never went away. And so then it will appear that it went away and came back when in actuality it did not. So we've actually had this red tide since October of last year. It's just continuing.
And I guess the big question with a little bit of time, is this naturally occurring?
Yes, this is naturally occurring. We have anecdotal reports of red tide, actually discolored water. Again, that's a misnomer. It's harmful algal bloom. It can appear anywhere from red to orange to green. In our case, usually like a darker brown in the water. But we have naturally occurring anecdotal reports dating back to Spanish explorers in the 1500s. And long before we settled the coast and started putting any pollution or nutrients into the water. But yes, very naturally occurring. Native Americans knew when not to eat shellfish. There's been reports of dead fish even dating back to the early 1800s that have been recorded as well. So this is a naturally occurring phenomenon. Now, if once those blooms do move inshore along the coast, and if anything that we are doing is making them stay around longer and maybe becoming a little more intense, is that something that we are causing to happen? Possibly. But correlation does not actually mean cause and effect. We would need a very long-term study in order to determine that. Exactly.
Great. Thank you so much. And we'll have more from Karen coming up at 11 p.m. And I also sat down with Congressman Buchanan about what they can do at the legislative level. So keep tuned in. But for now, I'm going to toss it back to you guys. I'm live at the laboratory for USF. Taylor Torregano, ABC7, your Suncoast News.